people, when we talk about these things, people talk about what ifs. What if the traffic gets bad? What if the schools get overcrowded? Rather than be fearful about what we don't know, let's wait till that's a problem. What we do know is that 70% of Americans that want to buy a house cannot buy a house. What we do know is birth rates are falling. What we do know is that the average age of a first time buyer is 40 years old. We got to fix that.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Glick. If this is your first time joining us each week, when you tune in, you're going to hear one of two different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, you're going to hear industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines and we talk about what it means for the land development industry. And then other times, like today, we have an interview style show where we have on someone associated with the industry and we dig into some topics that are of interest to them. Now, today I'm excited to have with me Jay Knight. Jay is the manager at Templar Development based out of Atlanta. He's also the host of the Build Baby Build podcast, and he's also the chairman of the Georgia Residential Land Development Council. Mouthful. I got
Yeah.
it all, though. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm excited to do this. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and again, digging into your background, looking at the time that you've spent in the industry. So your tenure goes back into the 70s, the late 70s. And I'm really interested going back at that time. From a lot of times I'm interviewing people that, maybe got started after the 2008 financial crisis, or not necessarily much sooner than that. Once in a while I'll have people who got started in maybe the 90s, or even 80s. But going back to the 70s, how did you find land development and home building to get into the industry?
Yeah, so it's a family business, and in 1978 I was 14 years old, and my father and uncle were started framing houses, and I was working with those guys on the summers and weekends. And so just over time, we developed a system. We became very good framing contractors, and in the early '80s, we were using the framing business to finance our building business. And so we were in South Metro Atlanta. There wasn't a lot going on particularly Gwinnett County is North Metro Atlanta. There was a lot going on. And so we would drive up every morning at 5:30 in the morning, get home 9 o'clock at night, framing houses. And in 1981, uh, we built a home using cash, sold it, bought a couple of lots, continued to frame, financing the building business. And by 1983, I think my father was able to stay on the south side and really grow the building business. My uncle and I continued framing for another year. Then my uncle Scott, he stayed on the south and helped my dad with that. I continued running the framing crew for another couple of years. And by 1985, I think we were selling about 60 homes a year. By early 1990s, we were doing about 200 homes a year. And then the last year we owned Knight Homes, we sold 1,000 homes that year in 2020, and we sold the business that year. The reason we went into development was because in the mid 80s, there wasn't a lot of development happening on the south side of Metro Atlanta. And just out of a necessity for lots, we just started developing our own lots.
So on the home side, when you got all the way up to I think you said 1,000 homes a year, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what did that growth look like for you and the company? As far as, I mean, it's a lot different building, 15, 20 homes a year versus 1,000 homes a year. What did that look like internally within the company and how it kind of operated?
We were up to about 100 employees. Five of us were named Knight. Each of us had kind of different disciplines that we managed. That by the time it got that big, in the course of our career, we had um, to date, because we're still in the business, we had built and sold about 15,000 houses, and so it was very incremental in the way it grew. I had kind of a after the framing, I got my real estate license and broker's license. Now I ran our sales department. My uncle was everything. He was backstop on everything construction and development. And my father just had a natural affinity towards the business, understood finance and things like that. And then later, my cousins came in, and they were both very talented, and and so it grew so incrementally that it was never shocking. The only thing that was shocking was in 2008 when the music stopped, and because we'd never been on that end before, it'd been a steady line of growth for the 28, 30 previous years. And then after 2008, having to regroup, everybody developed a new talent set. Then that we're all experts in it, but we don't want to live through that again.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think there's a lot of stories of some things that went down during that time period that really disrupted a lot of businesses as well. So it's always cool to hear those who kind of survived those times and continued on the other side of it, with a business or getting back in and continuing to scale up and everything. I'm curious too, with you mentioning that this is a kind of a family business that really you got into. Is it the family side that kept you in it over all these years, or getting into it maybe because it was a part of a family business? Did you kind of find a love for a certain part of the home building process that kept you in it, or how much of it was family versus the industry itself?
That's a really great question. I've never thought about it in those terms. What happened is growing a business like this from scratch. So I was there from the first nail we ever drove, right? And so for my father and my uncle, it was probably like another child because you sacrifice for it, you feed it, you think about it all the time. For me, it was like a sibling, at times like a sibling that needed a lot of attention. And so we, as it grew, it had its own identity, and we all were just in love with it in different ways. And so I think what was wonderful is as it grew and maybe our career interests changed, there were so many opportunities to change hats and stay in the same business because it was big enough to accommodate that. So I had framed houses, I had sold houses, I had ran our sales teams, and I learned a little bit about land in the late 80s, early 90s, and I began doing our land acquisitions, still managing a lot of the other things as well. We never were. What was neat was nobody was ever in a single silo. We were all working in different areas of the company, all with a level of expertise because we had learned it from the ground up. But then the things that we were most passionate about, we never really crossed. Like I was really passionate about sales and the land acquisition. My father more so in the finance side. My cousin is doing more of that now, and he really understands that inside and out. Then my uncle was just became a self-taught guru on everything development and building. And so we were able to enjoy working in all areas of the business, but we all had kind of the things that entertained us the most or interested us the most is what we individually got to concentrate on.
I imagine having all of that kind of breadth of experience in all the different areas of the business, even when you did finally start to more focus on a specific area of the business that you worked on, it gave you some understanding of what everybody else was doing. So when you approach them, whether it's you holding people honest, but also just kind of understanding what they've got on their plate and the types of things that they're doing, do you think that that helped you just overall as a company, having everybody early on take on more roles, wear more hats until finally kind of specializing?
Yes, 100%. One, we all had just tremendous respect for one another. We didn't have to ask questions about a lot of kind of superfluous stuff because all of us had been decision makers, in buying land, in developing land, in building homes, and designing homes, and so yeah, I think that experience made us very efficient. We didn't spin our wheels or spend a lot of time mulling over decisions and things like that. We were fairly singular focused for a long time, and I think to a large degree still are.
Yeah, there's a lot of family businesses out there, and you hear stories that are, some that are positive, some that are negative, and
Hmm.
every business has its own challenges. But was there anything, as you went through this process over the last, 30 years or so, did you see any part of the family structure that was impacted by the business at all? Or were there things that almost like you had to establish a common understanding among the family of saying, hey, this is business, this is family? And, or was it pretty much kind of tied all together just because the business was a big part of the family?
Yeah, it's kind of consuming. So when we saw each other away from work, well, one, we saw each other every day, so there really wasn't a real need to get to get together
Yeah.
after work. But whenever we did, I mean, there's always a reason that we're around each other. We talk business and we talk about opportunities, and and now that was 47 years ago, so we're reminiscing on times on framing crews and stuff like that. My father and uncle are still here and still working, and we'll all admit that these stories are a lot more fun to remember than they were to live. I can tell you that. But yeah, so the thing with us that was kind of unique was my dad is 10 years older than my uncle. He's 13 years older than me. I'm 13 years older than my cousin, who's 7 years older than his sister, my other cousin who works here. And I think what happened with that was there was a lot of deference to each other because of our age. I would have been deferential towards my father anyway, and then of course my uncle. But I think the fact that Scott, my uncle, was 10 years younger than Dad, I don't think he had the need to compete, and they just never seemed to compete with each other. I remember all of us understanding early on that if any of us made a decision, then that was the decision, that we weren't going to question each other, even if we disagreed. There would be if the decisions had been made, we would not second guess each other or undercut each other, and I think there was a lot of trust there. Plus, my uncle got very, very serious about his faith life in the mid 1980s, and just is a super talented guy that had this just overwhelming humility, and I think that humility um, got into the DNA of the business starting around 1985, and so it made it difficult to let your ego get in the way without or not being consistent with what your core belief system is.
Yeah, and so Templar Development is your current company. I saw
Mhm.
a lot of knights on the company website,
Yeah.
who are part of the team and everything. So for those who are, we have people listening in from around the country, and so for those who aren't familiar with your company, how would you describe what it is that you guys do?
We are primarily residential land development company. We grew night homes. The home building business was the primary business. We only developed lots really to feed that building company. Well, honestly, over time, the development business was as profitable as the home building business. So when we sold our business to Dan Ryan Builders, and it's now known as DRB Homes, we were probably the first or second largest privately held home builders in Georgia. And the development side, the lots we produced were it was always with the end user in mind. So there's a couple of ways to look at development. So if you're a developer and you're really not you really want to maximize the number of lots you can get on a site. And we want to do that too. But we were, routinely presented opportunities that some lots really weren't buildable. You had to keep in mind what the end product was. And I think what we did a really good job of is designing our sites and choosing locations with the buyer in mind, the end user in mind, the homeowner in mind. And that was the way we graded the lots. That was the way we tried to shoehorn lots into places that maybe they didn't belong. We tried to stay away from that. We as much as possible we stayed away from power lines and things that places we wouldn't want to live necessarily. But at the same time, we always were the price leader in any market we entered. and that was really important too, because the our business was based on just math. So there's more teachers in a school than there are principals. We wanted to build houses that teachers could afford. There's more cashiers at Walmart than there are store managers. We wanted to build homes that the cashiers could afford, and that served us very well. And it really led our land buying decisions, the lot sizes we fought for, the minimum square footages of homes we fought for. And so where we really do our best work is when we get a site that has yet to be zoned, and it gets saddled with a lot of conditions that may not be workable for the end product. But we do a really good job of working, rolling up our sleeves, and fighting for affordable homes.
Do you think that the fact that you started out as builders before getting into development has been an advantage for you because you have some of that understanding of the end consumer and of the builder who's going to be building the homes?
100%. Uh, yeah, I mean, the lot is only valuable if you can put a marketable home on it. And so that's at the top of our list of priorities, and that's our filter.
Yeah, we've heard plenty of horror stories of people getting into development, going and essentially working with an engineer and getting plans drawn up with a lot size that nobody's going to build on. And then they spend all that money and that time getting approval and everything. And then they got to go back to the drawing board and they waste so much money because I do think you get a lot of people jumping into development without necessarily the knowledge or the experience or even talking to people I think already in the industry, and they make some of those mistakes. And so I was just curious about that, having that home building background before getting into development.
Yeah, I think it was very valuable.
So on the land side, so that was obviously has been a big part of what you do as well on the land acquisition side. Do you have something? I'm always curious to ask this, but when you go and you look at a piece of land that you're considering doing a project on, is there something that stands out to you like right away when you're looking at a piece of land or when you walk the site?
The first thing to me is just the area, just the municipality it's in, proximity to employment centers, that type thing. Then we look at the surrounding area and what is selling. And especially in this market, you don't want to think. I think it's tempting to think that if it sold $400,000 houses last year, it can accommodate $525,000 houses this year. I think we're at the high end of the pricing and have been for a bit. And so the performance we run are based on, even though if I'm buying your piece of raw land today, Ryan, we won't have homes ready to market for 3 years. It'll take a year to zone it, a year to permit it, a year to put it on the ground, and 6 months to put a house up. Now, there'll be a lot of people that listen to your show that'll say, man, I beat that every day. And maybe you do. Uh, but we budget that because the municipalities are so difficult to predict that we have to budget these wide time frames. So you're looking at a site, making decisions for a product that won't even be on the ground for 3.5 years. But all you can use for data is what's available today. And so you look at the absorption rates today, you look at the general sales price today, um, and so what we do is we really aren't looking for big zoning battles. So if we're because right now in the southeast, and maybe I don't think it's just Metro Atlanta, I think it's all over the southeast. There's such a NIMBYism everywhere that if we can just do something that is consistent with what's already been done in the area, then we have a pretty good chance of getting our zoning is approved. And so we've got a general idea of development cost. We know we want that lot to occupy 20, but increasingly it's becoming 25%. of the average sales price of the house, and we just start backing in the numbers. So if we want to be at $300,000, let's say the lot is going to be 25% of that, so that's $75,000. We know the development costs. Let's say lots around this neighborhood are 50-foot wide. Well, when we start backing that out, I know what 50-foot lot costs to develop, and I start backing that out of that 75,000. It starts revealing what I can pay for the land. And really, I don't get into any big haggles a lot of times on price of land. I know what it's worth. Um, More times than not, we're way apart from what the seller expects. But we don't need them all. We need, um, what we want to develop about 1,000 lots a year, and it only typically takes about 10 neighborhoods to make that happen. So we just keep looking, just keep looking.
Are there any common mistakes that you see maybe newer developers make when it comes to the land acquisition side?
Yeah, I see developers that close their deals after zoning is complete. I don't think you should ever close a deal until it's permitted. That was pretty safe bet a while back. We used to be able to close after zoning, but increasingly, while it's being developed, there are so many stormwater management requirements that come into play. It's not unusual for us to lose 20% of the approved lots trying to comply with stormwater um, requirements, and you don't know that until you're engineering the site, and that's well after the zoning. I see, in our area, rock's a big deal. I've seen guys buy sites without doing proper rock testing. The due diligence, you really need to spend some money on due diligence, just just to make sure you don't get any of these expensive surprises. In our area, rock would be one of those. Groundwater would be one of those. Um, Inconsistencies in buffers would be one of those. So I think just be really good on your due diligence. Don't close until you have your permit. And then the municipalities, if you're new to this, the municipalities will put zoning conditions on you that may seem fairly benign when you're in the middle of it, but they could make your project completely unmarketable. Uh, the municipality may call for a minimum square footage of 1,400 square feet, but the zoning commission wants to stick you with 1,800 square feet, and you're there as the new developer. You got to make a decision, and you just think, okay, it can happen. Or in our case, more likely they're going to ask for 2,800 square feet, and you got so much time invested, and you just go ahead and accept that, or they say, they want four-sided brick. And, that's not in the code, but you're not going to get that zoning unless you accept their larger home, brick house, 812 roof instead of the 312 that is required in code. And all of a sudden, you walk out of that zoning with a zoning that you got the zoning, you won, but you've got something that's not marketable.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about the marketability side of things, because you may work with the municipality and they want like a certain size of home. They want a certain form factor that's above a certain size, maybe,
Hmm.
but the market wants something different.
Hmm.
Like you're trying to build something maybe more affordable, and you can't really do it on the form factor that they're asking for. How do you usually handle that? Is that just presenting data to the city to try to get them to understand that, hey, this is what the market wants, this is what our community is looking for,
Hmm.
and approach it that way?
You know what? We've had a very difficult time persuading municipalities lately. What we have found are a couple municipalities who want that type of housing that is a smaller home that gives you a lot of flexibility. But these are municipalities that are on the front end of growth. They're in Metro Atlanta, these would be like an hour drive from Atlanta Center. But you do your best. Sometimes you just have to quit a deal, and um, and I think you're money ahead quitting a deal, even if you've spent a year on it and you've got tons of money in the due diligence. I think you're better to do that than to pour good money after bad and put a neighborhood on the ground that's just not marketable. And right now, you know, in my position as the chairman of the Georgia Residential Land Development Council, I was invited to speak to a big county in Metro Atlanta about affordable housing. And because 70% of Georgians right now who want a home can't afford a new home. We have what was the National Association of Realtors 2 weeks ago released that the average age of a first time home buyer now is 40 years old.
Yeah.
And that's just tragic. So when I talked to this one county, we were trying to, I said, I think the first thing we need to do is agree on the definition of an affordable home. Now, in Georgia, the average salary um, is $54,000 a year. That's the average salary for a working person in Georgia. That will buy you a $206,000 house. All right. So in this particular municipality, I told them, I said, look, you've got 860 job openings in this county. Average salary for those was about $54,000 a piece. That was police officers, teachers, that kind of thing. You graduated 32,000 kids from your high schools in the last 20 years. They can all, let's say half of those are now 28 to 38 years old, and they can afford a $206,000 house because that's the average salary. Right now in your county, you've got 13 listings under $250,000. 13. You need 17,000 of these if you want your children to live in the same zip code as where they grew up. And and so when we started talking it through, we can build a 3-bedroom, 1,000 square foot house on a 35-foot wide lot for $206,000. We can do that. And a lot of people in the industry wouldn't want to do that because even if the margin was decent, the dollar amount's not that big. You'd have to do a lot of that type house to really earn a living as a developer or home builder. But we can do it. The reason we're not allowed to do it is because the reason we can't do it is because we're not allowed to do it. The
Right.
zonings don't allow it. The crowds come out and shout us down and they vote us down. But meanwhile, we we have our home buyers, first time home buyers are 40 years old. That's not something that's just inconvenient. That's tragic. And we have birth rates that are falling. My children, or I have 4 grown kids, they're 29, 31, 34, and 35. Routinely I talk to their peers who are waiting to get married or have children until they buy their home. Well, if that decision has been pushed off to 40 years old, then they're on the tail end of having kids. And and a lot of people don't think that's important. I happen to think it's very important. And so that's the case. We've tried to get away now from making the case that it's freedom of expression. We need to build houses. We've got private property rights and all that. No, Henry Ford is credited for saying, I don't know if he said it or not, that he wanted to build cars that the people in the assembly line could afford to buy. I think, and I'm thankful to be able to talk to you, Ryan, because you've got such a big audience across the nation. If we agreed that we need affordable homes, and we also agreed that we should index it to the average salary of the municipal employee. So the municipalities would not be able to mandate anything more expensive than what their own employees can afford. Now, I will say this once again, if that were the case, the vast majority of builders and developers would build larger homes and lots than 1,000 square foot houses on 35-foot lots. There's just not a lot of money in it. But that would open the door for young entrepreneurs in an environment where in Atlanta, Georgia, we're looking at 75% of the homes being built by publicly traded builders. And I think that trend is heading across the nation. There probably would be some young entrepreneurs that would enter that market and build those $200,000 homes. And when in 2021, when we saw costs go up by 40% and interest rates then rose to intersect at this high cost, higher interest rate, we weren't allowed to go meet the buying power of our consumer. And had there been a lot more flexibility at the municipal level on the zoning conditions and that type of thing, we would have been able to. We wouldn't have had this uh, uh, big softening in the market like we've been experiencing the last 3 years.
Yeah. Is this so the Georgia Residential Land Development Council, is that really meant to be kind of an advocacy group for developers?
It is. So we I think we're good at this, and I think Templar Development is a very good development company. We've been around for a long time, and we were just completely frustrated about a year and a half ago. My partner Chris and I, he's my cousin, we were sitting there thinking, are we not good at this, or is everybody having these problems? And so we started talking to our peers in the industry, and we were all having the same thing. And so we um, we worked on one piece of legislation last year. We got it sponsored. It goes up for a vote this next legislative session, and all it does is tightens timeframes on permitting. We after the zoning, we go through a land disturbance permit process to get our permit. That's routinely taken a year. Used to, before computers, it took about 60 days. And so um, the municipalities all say they complete their reviews in 45 days. They only write you up for code items, all that kind of stuff. And so we're just trying to codify into law the things that they say they do anyway. And I think we got a lot of traction. People see the logic in that. All it would do is we think so. Atlanta needs 36,000 building permits a year. It's a big market. We didn't deliver 5,000 building lots in the last 12 months. And so that's a huge deficit. That's 30,000 lot deficit. It's estimated that we won't deliver 10,000 in the next 12 months. Well, if that permitting process got tightened up, perhaps we could double that. So instead of 1 year, maybe you could get your permit every 6 months, and we could get 20,000 permits in the next 12 months as opposed to 10. And so that increase in supply should put some downward pressure on pricing, which would be good for the consumer. But there's a lot of work to do in the affordable house space. This should be a very, very easy first step.
For people who are listening in that are in the state of Georgia, how do they find out more information about the organization and potentially even join? I mean, I assume there's like a way to be a member
Sure.
and join the organization.
Thank you, Ryan. They could go to grldc.org. And if anybody from other states has advice for me or wants to get information on doing the same thing in your state, um, I think we have home builder associations all over the nation, and the home builder association was very helpful um, with us going from drafting this legislation to actually getting it refined and getting in front of the legislators. The HBA did a really good job with that. The HBA also has to be very, very diplomatic because it has long relationships and we need them to be diplomatic and people have their doors open. I think GRLDC can be a little bit more myopic and maybe a little bit more assertive on a limited number of issues instead of having to spread its resources among all the issues that the HBAs have to deal with.
One thing I was going to mention that came up on our last episode. So I was talking to a builder, custom builder, based out of Austin, Texas, and his focus is really building these high performance homes and trying to find a way. He wants to do it at scale and be able to build more affordable houses. But the big thing for him is we have to be able to build smaller
Mhm.
homes. Like he talked about just how over time the size of homes, I think he, if I remember right, I think he said since the 70s, home sizes have doubled in square footage. And so that was one of the big things that he talked about and basically said that when builders are building at scale today, a lot of the national builders, it's not necessarily advantageous for them to build the smaller form factors because it doesn't cost as much to make the home a little bit bigger and they can charge more if they make the home a little bit bigger. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the industry adapts to this, knowing that people can't, like you've just talked about, people can't afford a $400,000 starter home. It's just not realistic for people who are making $50,000 a year. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And do you think it's just something where the industry at large has to start just taking a step back and realizing like people can't afford these homes, or people who are getting into them are going to end up upside down in their mortgages because, values potentially could fluctuate here in the
Hmm.
coming years?
Yeah, people, when we talk about these things, people talk about what ifs. What if the traffic gets bad? What if the schools get overcrowded? And that's not happening. Trends in enrollment schools across the nation are trending down. But, rather than be fearful about what we don't know, let's wait till that's a problem. What we do know is that 70% of Americans that want to buy a house cannot buy a house. What we do know is birth rates are falling. What we do know is that the average age of a first time buyer is 40 years old. So we got to fix that. We have to fix that. Now, to his point, we definitely need smaller homes. And, there was talk, I hear Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, talk about not really looking at what's good for Wall Street, looking at what's good for Main Street. And then, when Walmart was growing back in the 80s, there was a concern that Walmart would come to town and close down all the mom and pop stores and all that kind of stuff. Well, those things happen. The same exact things happening in home building. So what happens is with these processes that are so long and these conditions are so onerous, the small guy, the small entrepreneur, he can't ride that out. He can't ride out those kind of time frames. He can't build with those kind of conditions. Um, and in most cases now, he can't get any financing anyway. What would be great is if there was a market like your friend talked about, just all it would be is the Houston, Texas does a pretty good job, I think, about giving flexibility in zoning. If you look right now, I think Houston's one of the healthiest markets in Texas, where some of the markets, even in Texas, aren't doing that great. Houston stands alone. And it seems like there's so much flexibility in their zoning that the builders are allowed to go and meet the market where its purchase power lies. So, what would be neat for the industry, probably and healthy, is that if the big builders did pass on that kind of thing, so and it would leave the door open for younger entrepreneurs and that want to enter the industry. It would give them kind of a niche where they could fill. When we sold Night Homes in 2020, my cousins and I stayed on for 2 years to help lead that, and I was in land acquisitions, and it was very well run, very efficient. But the resources we had, we could ride out things, we could absorb things. We had a different kind of buying power, and so all of this stuff and the inflexibility on the municipal side is essentially ensuring that the only builders you'll have are the larger builders.
Well, let's based on the time here, let's shift into the last segment of the show, which is the lightning round. So I've got five
All
questions
right,
for you, and all related to your experience and everything. First one for you: what's one thing you wish you knew earlier in your career?
that the banks couldn't eat you. When we went through 2008, man, it was so dire and banks were calling and all that. And if I just could have relaxed and known that they can do a lot, but they can't kill me. That might have taken some of the stress away.
All right, second one: what's something in development that never seems to change?
The frustration with the municipalities.
Do you think that's ever going to change?
That was the genesis for GRLDC, is we're trying to make it change.
All right, third one: what's one trend you hope doesn't stick around in development?
Man, I've developed a ton of houses that are, quote unquote boxes. And and the reason that's there is the municipalities define the lot size, how the side setbacks, the front setbacks, the size of the lot, where the parking the garage has to be, the pitch of the roof. Then they complain that the houses all look alike. Well, heck, man, they design 90% of the house. They don't really leave us enough to be creative. I wish that would change because, man, these builders are entrepreneurs, they're assertive, they're risk takers, and they're very, very creative. And we would all benefit if we allowed those guys to be creative. And we had such a wide variety of homes. As it is, we just don't have a wide variety.
All right, fourth one. What advice would you give to someone doing their first land deal?
Find out from some veterans the due diligence checklist and don't deviate from it.
All right, last one. What's the most underrated skill in land development?
Math. It's all math. It's all lots per acre, cost per lot. Um, I don't really get a lot out of walking land because these tracks are so big. I typically just wait until I can get a topography run. If there's something obvious, for me, it's kind of a waste of time. But just having a general understanding of math, you can kind of quickly do the math on what the market is, what ratio you have to spend on your lot, what your development costs were last time you did it. And what it does, it keeps you from spending too much time looking on deals that just don't have a chance.
Well, what's the best way for people listening in to connect with you, learn more about Templar development? And I guess the other two things, we already talked about Georgia Residential Land Development Council and where they can go for that. But then the other thing would be also where they can check out your podcast, Build Baby Build
Well, Build
podcast.
Baby Build, the channel on YouTube is Build Baby Build 25. And thank you for mentioning that, Ryan. It's just all it is trying to move the conversation towards what can we do under existing processes to affect affordability. We just released an episode and I posted it today on the 50-year mortgage. We had a full discussion on that. If anyone wants to contact me directly, they can email me. My email is j@templar Templar-dev.com. And I would love to talk to anyone want to enter the market in Atlanta. We got lots of neighborhoods coming out of the ground. It's a great time to be in Atlanta and the Southeast. And or if anybody just wants to talk about the industry, I'd love to talk to them about that.
Perfect. All right, guys. So if you check in the description for this episode, you'll see a link there for the show notes page. On the show notes page, you're going to see all the links that were just mentioned, so you can quickly access them there. Jay, really appreciate you hopping on here and sharing some of your wisdom with all of our listeners. It was a great conversation, and yeah, you definitely know a lot about the industry, and I know people are going to get some value out of this episode.
I'm honored, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, guys, that's all for this episode. If you're not already subscribed, click that button. Otherwise, we will talk to you all next week.